Good evening. My name is Alexander Hagen, and yesterday a very interesting article came out of the New York Times. This article seems to me a concerted effort by the administration to begin to provide a little bit of insight into the mechanics of the Libya intervention and to try to clarify things that we've been asking about for 50 months. So it is useful. It's also extremely disturbing and disappointing how much these people seem to be running to escape accountability. So here the mainstream press describes that the U.S. armed Al-Qaeda to overthrow Gaddafi. And they put it right here. U.S. approved arms for Libya rebels fell into Jihadis' hands. December 5th, 2012. Well, I listed an article that describes this in more excruciating detail back in, what was it, right on the day of Gaddafi's death, basically. So should we be happy that finally the mainstream media is coming out with this information? So we have two lessons we can draw about these interventions. As James Madison said in Federalist 10, you should never allow a party that has a benefit to also be judge, jury, and executioner. And so we had a clear conflict of interest in enabling NATO to bomb Libya, destroy their army, kill half of the people in their army, 15,000 people, a country with an army the size of the New York City Police Department, have Rachel Maddow cheerleading and calling this plague down upon the country. This country could have had a peaceful transition, and it had an economy that rivaled Chile's and Argentina's. It had no food insecurity, no homelessness, free education. It was a police state, but the people that ran it were not stupid people. There were thuggish elements, but it was not a thuggish country overall. And the proof of that is that in the elections, the Islamists did not win, yet the Jihadist religious extremists are terrorizing the country. A third of the tribes there are being terrorized, women are being terrorized, blacks have been massively lynched, professional women that were powerful under the old government are being raped and tormented. There's more torture camps in Libya than virtually anywhere else in the world, and this is all paid for by NATO countries' tax dollars. Clearly, what happened was that the U.S. administration was perpetuating neoconservatism, and this was in part to win the midterm election, or the recent election for Obama's second term, so that he wasn't shown to be soft in national security. We don't know why Obama is such a hawk and Clinton is such a hawk, even more hawkish than Obama. These people are basically a third George Bush term. Gore Vidal said it, Ron Paul said it, Dennis Kucinich said it, and someday perhaps we'll get some insight into it. But these people are either arrogant, ill-informed people living in a bubble, being manipulated by the intelligence agencies that want to have this global totalitarian surveillance state, where the same people run the government, as run the media, as run the war companies. And so we can look at creepy things like Andrea Mitchell being married to Alan Greenspan and commenting on things that would clearly involve her husband's interests. We can see in Morning Joe Zbigniew Brzezinski coming in, who's a creepy fellow in many respects, with his daughter Mika, and Aaron Burnett at CNN marrying into the Citigroup executive family, which brings me to an example of how creepy media manipulation has become. Here is Aaron Burnett interviewing Julian Assange. Just watch this one segment.
Well, the technology to do it has become cheaper.
So let me just ask you a little bit about, you talk about the cables that obviously are at the center of this entire case in the U.S., in the book. And Bradley Manning, obviously, he's the one who had them, according to the United States. He's in a pretrial hearing. He's trying to get the charges against him. They're for aiding the enemy, thrown out of court. But obviously, as I said, he could end up spending the rest of his life in jail. Do you feel any guilt about that, since the information the U.S. government says that he stole was published by you? No matter where you got it, you published it.
Bradley Manning is in court today today in the United States and throughout this week. The case is not about whether Bradley Manning allegedly stole cables or not. The case is about the abuse of Bradley Manning. Over a 9-month period, Bradley Manning was abused. In fact, the United Nations has investigated this. The Special Rapporteur for Torture, Juan Mendez, found formally against the United States, saying his treatment was akin to torture. Why was he treated that way? Well, his lawyer argues, and many others who follow the case argues, it was ordered to coerce him into a confession that would bring down me or bring down WikiLeaks. As far as I know, there has been no such confession, but that's the case that's ongoing now. And that case is a reflection of a decay in the rule of law. The secretary, Hillary Clinton's spokesperson, resigned over the issue. The entire Quantico prisoner base in Virginia was closed over this issue. It's a serious issue, and it reflects serious problems within the military system. It has a feeling of unaccountability, and that unaccountability is flowing into other parts of our life.
Now, I don't want to get into detail. I know you have a strong point of view, obviously, on how Bradley Manning has been treated, but I didn't want to go down that path. I wanted to ask you.
Now, listen to that. I didn't want to go down that path. Isn't that convenient? So Julian Assange and Mr. Bingy, who is a former National Security Agency employee, have both charged that the United States is basically archiving every email, every Facebook post, every internet activity, every mouse click that you make, every phone call you make, every implementation of any application online is all being vacuumed and archived and can potentially be used against any of us the way it was used against General Petraeus after he contradicted the Obama administration in October about the Benghazi affair and then found himself politically embarrassed, ruined, and out of a job as soon as the election was over. So we live in a soft fascist state, or a soft totalitarian state, a Nazi-like entity with a big consumer happy face. So if the people running it are good guys, all will be well. They're probably not good guys now. But when times get tough and bad guys come into power, there's a massive surveillance, correctional, military, and police system that could do enormous harm, and it is our duty as Americans to overturn this. So this article in the New York Times makes your blood also grow cold when you look at it with a knowing eye. So this idea that the Obama administration secretly gave its blessings to arms shipments to Libyan rebels, but became alarmed as evidence grew that Qatar turned some of the weapons over to Islamic militants, is ridiculous, because the people in Libya that were doing the fighting were largely former Al-Qaeda-like fighters. And this is no secret to anyone in the CIA familiar with the matter. Is that why Petraeus was turned out and hoisted? Was it because the CIA duped the Obama administration into creating a destabilization and misery all over Africa and the Middle East by arming to the hilt right-wing religious extremists who are terrorizing Sufi Muslims, blacks, women, gays, socialists, a third of the tribes in Libya, now causing problems even within the Syrian rebels, because the Democrats in Libya and the Democrats in Syria are unable to stand up to these armed groups. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but the most important question about the killing of Chris Stevens, which is an unimportant event because one white life should not scream louder than 10,000 African lives, but nonetheless, why did the hand that we fed these weapons turn them on us? Chris Stevens might as well have handed the machine gun to the people who used it on him, so to speak, because that's what happened in terms of mechanics. So then they go on to say that no evidence has emerged linking the weapons provided by the Qataris to the attack that killed 4 Americans. But this is fully logical consequence and blowback of our overthrowing their government by arming jihadists. So this sentence is another craven sentence. This is Washington executive branch spin being pumped out straight pablum style by the New York Times reporting establishment. The sentence makes no sense. No evidence has emerged linking the weapons to the attack. U.S. approved arms for Libyan rebels fall into jihadis' hands. So here we say the weapons and money from Qatar strengthen militant groups in Libya, allowing them to become a destabilizing force since the fall of the Gaddafi government. That's neither. So yes, if you take the Obama administration on its face, which you shouldn't, the strength of the Al-Qaeda-like elements in Libya has been much greater than they had hoped if you take them on their face. Then we go on to say the experience in Libya is taking a new urgency because they're looking at the same problem in Syria. Well, this is true for all of us. We're all looking at Syria through the lens of Libya. So there's 2 lessons. One, do not let anyone have the right to kill anyone without having some kind of a group that can control that beast, that includes people that don't necessarily share the same views. So you should have Brazil, Russia, India, countries that don't have a history of armed intervention all over the world, being able to check the United States, a balance of power in invasion and murder. And probably in the case of Libya, Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt should have had the ability to not allow this to happen. The African Union should have had the ability to not allow this to happen. And in Syria, it'll be the same thing. We need Iran at the table. If there's going to be any kind of a no-fly zone imposed, and I don't think you're going to get it, because nobody trusts the United States or NATO as a result of this. So here where it says the Obama administration did not raise objections when Qatar began shipping arms to opposition groups in Syria, there's another article that says clearly the U.S. is working to overthrow the Syrian government, has effectively declared war on Assad in the New York Times from several months ago. And it did offer encouragement, so it contradicts directly what's in here. But this article is not written by the New York Times. It was written by Obama administration and the CIA, perhaps, if they still get along. So this brings us to the question of, did Qatar double-cross the United States? Because Qatar ended up being the kingmaker. And if you study this, the Qataris stood right behind Belhaj, who's one of the military commander of Tripoli and a member of the Libyan Islamic fighting group and affiliated with Osama bin Laden through Yahya al-Libi, who we claimed we killed, being the number 2 man in Al-Qaeda, and he was brothers, so to speak, with Belhaj, who's the main guy we're funding in Libya. So we're funding them in Libya and we're killing them in Pakistan, the same group. And Qataris were literally standing behind them because they controlled all the weapons in Libya. They are the kingmaker. So was there a double cross here? It indicates that there was sort of a double cross, that the U.S. was too stupid to know how to deal with Qatar and Saudi Arabia. After selling them the largest arms package in our country's history, $80 billion worth of arms were sold to Qatar and Saudi Arabia in the first 2 years of the Obama administration. And these countries have become very aggressive, arming the Libyan repressive elements and then encouraging them to destroy Sufi shrines, repress the country, and they're doing the same in Syria. And it's not going to stop there. So this is describing a situation where we armed people in a conflict. We coordinated with Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and NATO to overthrow Gaddafi, and it went out of control and into the hands of more extreme elements than we anticipated. That's what the story is basically saying. Here, the U.S. is distancing itself from this Sunni axis. And this is interesting because Obama gets inserted directly in only in the good guy movements. The president made the point President Obama complained to the Emir of Qatar that his country was not coordinating its actions in Libya. The President made the point to the Emir that we needed transparency about what Qatar was doing in Libya. The only other mention we have of Obama as being directly involved is that he complained Hillary Clinton might throw bricks at his window because he wasn't being vigorous enough in the matter in one speech. No insight into how they made the decisions to go into Libya, except this bizarre drip, drip, drip of information that they decide is to their interests. Why are all these people speaking to the New York Times? Clearly, they want to get out their side of this story in the Benghazi affair. So Qatar also had many troops on the ground in violation of UN Resolution 1973. We had at least 100 guys on the ground. Libya's only got a military of 30,000 people. If you add all the Danish, French, British, Qatari, Saudi, Turkish, American, British, Norwegian special forces, they end up being about probably 5,000 men. 5,000 of the most elite trained people in the world against an army the size of the United States Police Department, along with Al-Qaeda, basically. And then the Berber, and then the revolutionaries that were actually seeking real democratic reform. And you see Qatar being the primary driver of the violent overthrow of the Gaddafi socialist government in Libya. Tells you why so few people understood what was going on, because the Emir of Qatar owns Al Jazeera, which people had begun to rely on as the counterpoint to the BBC and the Western media. What sort of craven story is this? So American officials say the UAE first approached the Obama administration in the early months of the Libyan uprising, asking for permission to ship American-built weapons the United States has supplied for the Emirates' use. Of course they asked permission. We just sold them the largest sale in U.S. history. The administration said, ship them other people's weapons. So this is where this fellow here talks about plausible deniability here. And again, we are not talking about the Muslim Brotherhood here. According to D.C., the Muslim Brotherhood is moderate. We are talking Al-Qaeda militias, officially linked or not officially linked. The technical term is plausible deniability. The State Department at this point had every reason to know what Qatar would do. The terrorist ties were well documented. The administration has never determined where all of the weapons paid for by Qatar, the UAE, went inside Libya. Officials said Qatar is believed to have shipped by air and sea small arms, machine guns, automatic rifles, and ammunition. Some of the arms since have moved from Libya to militants with ties to Al-Qaeda in Mali, where radical jihadi factions have pushed Sharia law in the northern part of the country, and also destroyed all of the historical shrines around the country, burned ancient religious texts, destroyed history in Mali, destroyed history in Libya. So we've got Obama giving his blessing to Qatari arms shipments to Libya, which not only go to Islamist militias in Libya, but which are then used by Islamist militias in Syria and Mali. This makes arms for hostages look petty. Now, these are not my opinions. This is another author. And the cover-up had begun very early. This wasn't clean at all. American officials say that United Arab Emirates first approached the Obama administration in the early months of the Libyan uprising, asking for permission to ship American-built weapons. Oh, yes, we've already talked about that. But instead urged the Emirates to ship weapons that Libya could not be traced to the United States. Now, how bothersome is that? It's basically like conspiring to commit a crime and then describing it to the New York Times. This fellow is saying that the U.S. expected the chances of these weapons to be used to carry out attacks against Americans or against American allies. So he's taking a very aggressive approach. It was very obvious this was going on because they had to be alerted not to interdict the cargo planes and freighters transporting the arms into Libya. So my question is, if there was so much concern about this, why didn't we do anything about it? Because the country is in misery now. There's a very heartbreaking story of a young woman who worked for the rebellion, had to flee the country, had been captured twice, and now lives in Britain, a refugee. Just one of 100,000 such stories. 3 cities have been ethnically cleansed and burned to the ground in Libya. The first by the U.S. And NATO, Sirte, then Tawerga, purged by these Mizratans, who their brigade was called the Purger of Slaves and Black Skins, and then the home of the Warfala tribe, the largest in Libya, raised and collectively punished for going their own direction. Here they go again. No evidence has surfaced that any weapons went to Ansar al-Sharia. We aren't specifically saying that a specific gun that the U.S. gave to the Libyan rebels was turned on Chris Stevens, but in actual fact it doesn't matter. The plan backfired and we were killed. He was killed as a direct result of our arming and aiding and abetting the arming of right-wing religious extremists to overthrow a secular socialist government that had voluntarily disarmed and cooperated with the United States in its war on terror. So it's so craven, this article. It's really sad because they're using legalistic mechanics to try to distance themselves while admitting to the very things that they're trying to distance themselves from. They reveal the link to Adel Hakim Belhaj. Name is misspelled. It's Abdel Hakim Belhaj, guys. And is not considered a moderate politician in Libya. His group was massively defeated, and he's definitely on the conservative side of the spectrum. Why would we consider Wahhabi monarchies good allies of the United States? What does that mean? The Wahhabis don't allow women to drive cars in most cases. It's considered the most virulently anti-female society in the world. And it's just pathetic how much of the media makes stories about persecution of women in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and never mentions the plight of women in Saudi Arabia virtually. They bring up the story about this small-time arms dealer who tried to get a license to sell arms to Libya, and that was involved with Chris Stevens. Chris Stevens tried to help him apparently get his license. He wasn't given one until he asked for a permit to sell licensed arms to Qatar. Now he's been raided by the Department of Homeland Security. So it's a very interesting article. It raises more questions than it answers, and it appears to be a collaboration between the Obama administration and the New York Times, and a very disorganized one. Thank you, good night, and good luck in solving this bizarre riddle.